Imagine an outdoor, wildlife, or nature photographer. What do you see? Chances are you're seeing something like this. Someone in earth-colored clothing, crouched on one knee, camera on one hand, lens on the other, and a large backpack. That's probably what most of us thought photographers would look like, especially those of us that grew up watching National Geographic documentaries and didn't really think much about it. Well, the truth is that those large backpacks, they quickly become uncomfortable, especially for everyday use. See, after I bought myself one of those bags, I also did what anyone in my position would do. I packed all my gear, I rode straight to the meadows, and began looking for compositions. And I had a good time, for about 30 minutes or so, until the weight of all my gear, most of them barely used by the way, made my back and shoulders feel uncomfortable. But I pushed on for a couple more hours, and then I drove back home feeling like I went to the gym. And mind you, I was only walking around looking for photos. This cycle repeated on and on until finally I wised up and got myself a smaller camera bag to pack just my essential gear. This honestly changed how I did photography, and I think it can change yours too. Now, this video isn't going to be me reviewing my camera bags. Instead, I want to talk about the benefits of going small and packing light. So here goes. Number 1, limitation breeds creativity. Now, I'm sure you've heard that quote before, but you probably didn't realize that it applies to photography too. See, you won't be able to pack all your gear if you choose to use smaller camera bags, and at first that can feel very limiting. You'll find yourself wishing you brought this other camera, or this other lens, or this other tripod. But after the initial frustration, your imagination also starts to kick in. You'll start to find ways to take the shot with just the gear that you brought with you. Maybe you hike further on, or maybe you take a few steps back, or maybe you use a rock as a makeshift tripod. And sure, no matter how creative you get, you still might not get the shot you wanted. But on the other hand, you might get one better. Take these photos of my brother-in-law and nephew, for example. I wanted a wider shot of this scene to show more of the background, but I only brought my Helios 58mm on this trip, so I didn't have that choice. Looking back, I actually like these better than my original ideas because the tighter compositions gave this scene the intimacy it needed. Which brings us to number 2. Less options, easier choices. Imagine browsing through a Chinese restaurant's menu without knowing what you want to eat beforehand. You're bombarded with dozens of options, and now you spend more time trying to decide what to eat instead of actually eating. Compare that to going to a steakhouse with only a page-long menu, and now you only need a few minutes to decide your entire meal. That's what it's like bringing all your gear versus just your essentials. You see something that catches your eye, and instead of choosing what camera to use or what lens to use or setting up your bulky tripod, you just yank out whatever's in your bag, you frame your shot, you hit the shutter, and you move on to find more compositions. Here are photos from a New York City trip we did to watch an Alicia Keys concert. On this trip, I only brought my Sony ZV-1 because that's the only type of camera Barclays would allow. I remember this day as a fun-filled day, largely because I wasn't weighed down by heavier gear, so I also got to take more compositions. And speaking of more compositions, number 3 is less weight and more movement. Smaller camera bags with less inside them will of course be lighter than their larger counterparts. And if you carry less weight, you'll have more energy to move around. And the more distance you cover and the more angles that you check, you'll find yourself finding more photographic compositions too. Think about it. If you only spend your time on one spot, then how are you supposed to know what might be just a few feet away? In my photo walks, I try to find compositions that I can string together, and most of those photos are just a few strides away from each other. I think that makes for better storytelling and, to me, a lot more fun. I also end up with more photos to edit, so my fun doesn't end when I decide to go home. And if I find a composition that could have been better had I brought something else, then I take that as an excuse to just go back and retake that photo. For example, here are photos from one of the first few times I went to Croton Point Park. These are not bad photos, to be honest, but on this day I remember seeing birds flying over the river, and I knew I wanted photos of them too. So when I went back, I made sure to bring a longer lens with me, and I ended up with these photos. And what do you know? This brings us to number 4. Less gear, more planning. If you know you can't lug your entire kit with you, then your ideas become more streamlined because then you know your limitations. Say for example you're going on a trip and you only brought a 35mm lens with you. Without the hindrance of other focal lengths, then your ideas will now be centered around that lens. And so now when you see something that catches your eye, your mind's eye also starts to work faster in terms of looking for angles and framing and distance. Now let's flip that around and say you don't know what gear to bring. But you know where you're going, don't you? So go and research that place. Go to Google Maps and see what other photos people are taking. Go to Street View and see if something is of interest to you. And then you plan accordingly. Here are photos I took at a coffee shop called Black Cow. My wife showed me Google photos of the place before we went, so I knew it would have an artsy, almost old school vibe to it. Knowing that, I packed my Ricoh 50mm lens with me so I can take photos that match their vintage vibe. This leads us to number 5. Gear mastery. Limiting yourself to just a few essentials can help you master them faster because you also put more reps in. This is especially crucial for beginners and possibly even intermediate level photographers. I compare this to training for sports like basketball, for example. Say I took 100 shots every single day from the corner for the next 2 months. I know that when someone passes me the ball from that exact same spot, muscle memory is going to take over and I'm going to have a better chance of making that shot. On the other hand, if I practiced a little bit more randomly, say 10 shots from the corner, 10 shots from the free throw line, 10 shots from the wing, 10 layups, and a bunch of random dribble moves, then I probably won't be very good at either one of them. So circling back to smaller bags, packing just your essentials will also let you know what your essentials are. And knowing that, you're going to use them more often. And the more often you use them, then the more you learn about them, which makes you a better photographer in the process. For me, when I started my photography journey, my most used gear was the Canon 60D. I used it to practice my macro photography every single day, so eventually I honed my process and my skills and creativity grew alongside it. I don't use that camera as much nowadays, but those skills translate to the gear I use now. And that, my friends, are the 5 reasons why smaller camera bags can make a huge impact in your creative journey. Now, I'm not saying that larger camera bags don't have a place in your cabinet, because of course they do. There will be times where you will need to pack more gear. But for all other days, do yourself a favor, get yourself a small camera bag, pack light, and take more photos. That being said, I hope you learned something from me today. And before you leave, don't forget to give us a like, subscribe for more videos like this, and what are your essentials? Comment down below and I'll see you on the next one. Peace!